If you can't use your phone to know where you are or where you need to go, will you be able to find your way in a crisis? What if you can no longer use your car? Do you have the fitness level necessary to travel long distances on foot? And if you do find yourself in such a situation where you need to travel from point A to point B in this way, do you have the gear, skills, and supplies that will sustain you while on the move? These considerations are relevant to one's survival if the world as we know it falls apart. A few centuries ago, people were far more adapted to the strain of moving over terrain by foot for many miles just to get to a market, and they didn't need Google Maps to know where they were or how to find their way home. This was definitely the case with the shinobi of feudal Japan. To know where you are going, you need to know where you are, and if plotting longitude, you need to know when you are. Shinobi didn't have global positioning systems to figure this out. Instead, they had to rely on the capacity of human memory to work out their position. Their memory was typically stocked with all sorts of information about their local topography, as well as terrain features of distant provinces, and their methods of knowing compass directions relied on an extensive understanding of star constellations, lunar movements, and the Chinese zodiac. Volume 17 of the Bansen Shukai speaks of the need for shinobi to study the stars by referring to star maps often enough that constellation patterns become easily recognized by the shinobi, while Polaris, the North Star, is not directly mentioned in their texts. We know that shinobi could work out north, south, east, and west by observing relationships between the star Hagun, the seventh star of the Big Dipper handle, and the time, month, or season. Compasses did exist in the days of the ninja, but these items were typically reserved for commanders and higher-ranking components of the army. However, shinobi knew how to make their own compasses, as evidenced by Tenji of the Bansen Shukai, which describes the heating of a piece of iron oriented on a north-south axis and magnetizing it by the shaping and quenching process. The result is a piece of metal roughly 2.5 inches in length and half an inch in width. Referred to the shinobi as a small fish, this piece of metal was floated in water to work out the magnetic north-south axis. If a compass was not available, shinobi knew how to estimate directions on the basis of lunar cycles and of course the rise and fall of the sun. These methods of calculating compass directions were obviated, however, in instances of travel to places a shinobi was familiar with. The art of ninjutsu explicitly calls for memorization of road systems and a familiarity with several provinces beyond a ninja's local area. The Hoi no Maki of the Yokan Kajo Demoko Kugi scrolls of the ninja contains the traditions of Shinobi Michimi no Koto, or knowing roads, and Shinobi Michimi Fumiyo no Koto, or walking roads. These traditions communicate to us that ninjutsu involves knowing travel routes by memory rather than by using maps and navigation technology. They also tell us that shinobi were constantly traveling on foot around their local provinces and beyond. In this way, knowledge of potential enemy provinces was collected prior to conflict, providing the ninja with highly valuable information pertinent to allied troop maneuvers and movements once exigent circumstances developed. If a shinobi was not familiar with a territory for whatever reason, his ninjutsu training reminded him of the importance of establishing contacts with other shinobi in various provinces. These were shinobi contacts who resided in the territory of interest and knew the area well. Land navigation for a shinobi largely relied on the accumulation of knowledge of the area prior to any emergency. But even with this map memory, their movements in conflict zones could be hampered or impeded by enemy checkpoints set up along well-known roads. To bypass these checkpoints, shinobi had a few options at their disposal. First, a shinobi would simply pass through the checkpoint under a pre-conflict cover that was already established. Ninjutsu traditions of knowing roads tell us that shinobi would blend into the traffic of a travel route because they made a habit of using the roads frequently, so people got used to seeing the shinobi on the roads in question. Therefore, when a checkpoint was set up, it was not so suspect to see the shinobi attempting to pass through it, especially if the prior background for traveling the road was already known to the authorities. For example, a shinobi would have credible covers such as that of a horse dealer or merchants of various types, and even temple priests, as evidenced by traditions like Hodoke Gakure no Koto, Buddha hiding, and Gyuba no Sute, or tradition of cattle and horses. If passing straight through a checkpoint was not possible, the next viable option was to find alternate routes around the checkpoint and to circumvent the checkpoint at night. The tradition of foxes and wolves, for example, advises one to emulate the behavior of wolves by avoiding where people typically travel and walk the less known paths, and to be like the fox by changing appearances. But this option could pose a navigational problem if the shinobi is not familiar with these lesser known travel conduits, and it shows in their ninjutsu texts. The Shoninki of 1681 gives advice on what to do if a shinobi is potentially lost on these less traveled paths, or if it is not clear which road the shinobi should travel on. One tradition states that the ninja should taste the road for its salt content and look for discarded sandals to tell them if there are people traveling on that path, whereas another tradition speaks of letting an old horse lead the shinobi through the unknown. If chancing the risk of getting lost to bypass a checkpoint was not appealing, another option a shinobi had was to dig a tunnel or hole under a wall or climb over it. These techniques are recorded in the traditions of the spider and connect us to the consideration of what gear a shinobi would carry while traveling. Typical items included a kaginawa, or grappling hook and rope for climbing, securing shelter, and for other cordage needs, a stone pencil for taking notes and making maps, an amigasa hat for hiding the face and shielding the head from the sun and rain, sanjaku tenugui, a multifunctional piece of cloth for filtering water, dressing wounds, concealing the face, a mask for smoke, and a rag for cleaning equipment, field medicine for fighting parasites and illness, and a fire starter or body warmer like an uchitake or danohi. The equipment carried by the shinobi would of course have been modified and swapped with other items depending on mission priorities. And for those of you wondering about 72-hour kits and go bags, yes, ninjutsu has a tradition concerning how they should carry gear called dogu mochio no koto, the art of carrying your tools in a bag of leather. Shinobi would carry rations like rice and hunger pills, water, security items like knives, blinding powders, and more, as they traveled around getting to know the land and people, and the seasonal conditions that would make certain routes impassable. This activity requires stamina and muscular integrity, as walking long distances with a constant load on your back is taxing to the body. This constant walking under the load of your life-sustaining equipment is something people would have been used to in feudal Japan, whereas today we call it rucking, a form of recreational exercise. This alludes to the fitness standing of the shinobi of history. Walking, say, 20 to 30 miles a day with equipment every day requires physical fitness. Running from threats or engaging with an enemy at speed with the load of equipment on your back requires even more. This is why in a previous video titled The Overlooked Skill of the Ninja, I posited that ninjutsu training must have involved drilling the shinobi in sprints and running over long distances in varying terrain under load. Their lower body strength and endurance must have been tremendous when we consider that they would navigate over mountainous terrain where horses could not travel and would have to carry what they needed to persist for an extended time. In addition to all of this, ninjutsu texts teach us that shinobi were always scanning their environment for threats as they traveled. Shinrin Fushin no Koto, the tradition of identifying suspicious woods, for example, speaks of how a ninja would avoid potential ambush points, and elsewhere in their writings we find references to staying wary of other travelers, especially at night. These are the key takeaways from this video. First, recognize that shinobi knew the areas they were operating in, and if they didn't, they had shinobi contacts who did, or they would get mapping information from local sources like temple monks. Ninjutsu students and the modern survivalists can benefit from this principle by making a habit of studying road systems and maps. If lost or needing to work out directions, a ninja knew how to estimate the north-south axis by observing the stars. We moderners could learn from this by knowing how to read the sky for the North Star Polaris, depending on your latitude, or make a shadow stick to determine direction by the sun. Shinobi would carry a compass needle to set in water to know what direction to go. So carry a compass, or know how to make one. A ninja needed to have alternate routes worked out in advance as a contingency to address enemy checkpoints or natural phenomena like landslides, earthquakes, and floods that could make a primary route impassable. Long distance travel requires stopping to rest and refueling with calories and water. A shinobi carried the gear and had the skills to sustain themselves without modern infrastructure. Knowing where to find water along a route is essential. Traveling long distance on foot requires physical fitness. Ninjutsu students should take up practices of walking about their local areas often, and if possible, practice running at speed over long distances under load of the emergency supplies they plan on carrying in a crisis. If you're interested in learning more about ninjutsu, you can check out my other videos or dive into the sources listed at the beginning of this video. Until next time.